we go. And we are ready to go. So first, let me take a moment and do a huge thank you to Catherine and Heather for being here. I was just telling them when I moved to Charlottesville, Literacy Volunteers was one of the very first nonprofits that I was able to get to know and meet people who were involved in. So it's been near and dear to my heart. And Heather and I have been talking for quite some time on when are we going to make this Lunch and Learn happen. So all of us here at UPG and further can learn about what they're doing and how to get involved in all of the programs and the awesome work that they're doing. Heather and Catherine, I'm going to let you all introduce yourselves and talk about what you do. I don't want to mess any of that up. So thank you for joining us, and please take it away.
Well, thank you, Samantha, for inviting us. So my name is Heather Tebbenhoff. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator with Literacy Volunteers. Been with the organization since 2016. And so basically what we're going to do, I'm going to introduce Catherine in a second, is we're going to do a two-part series of this. I'm going to talk broad strokes about literacy volunteers and specifically kind of about adult literacy and why it matters and what we do. And then Catherine's going to deep dive into citizenship. And talking about that because she is our citizenship coordinator. So Catherine, you can introduce yourself.
That's all I need to say.
Yeah.
I'm McCall. I'm the citizenship coordinator. I've been here about 3.5 years. I started 2 months before COVID. So that was a fun time to start a new job. And we're excited to share with you all today.
Yes. So what's going to happen is I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to do my presentation again, broad strokes. And then when I'm done, we'll kind of just take a minute to see if you have questions before Catherine deep dive. So we'll actually have 2 question periods. So, feel free again to put them in the chat, ask me as I go along. As I was warning Samantha, Catherine and I tend to be over preparers. So while we might have a lot of slides and a lot of information, I know that they're going to be shared with you. So I'm not going to read everything on the slide. We also have a handout with some links that you can refer to later. But I just want to make sure you had the information. So if I'm going through things kind of fast, it's just to make sure that we cover all the things that we want to make sure that you know today. So again, thank you so much, Samantha, for inviting us. I'm going to start over here. Perfect. Maybe. There we go. Okay, so this is just my title slide. I always love to, when I'm talking about literacy volunteers and what we do in adult education, to start with a visual, right? I'm a picture person. I want to know who we're talking about, what we're talking about. So I always like to start with this beautiful picture of our student population here in Charlottesville. This was taken in our student achievement ceremony back in 2019, the last time we had a student achievement ceremony. We are in the midst of planning one for 2023, our first one, post-COVID shutdown and all the things. But you can tell by looking at the picture who we're talking about, the demographics, the makeup of our student population. So literacy volunteers, we serve adult learners. Primarily, our student population are foreign born, and we're going to kind of dive into that. So if you just look at the picture and kind of get an idea of the faces of who we're talking about, all different ages, all different demographics from every corner of the world of where our students come to us from. So I'm going to start big picture of why adult literacy. What is it that we do? In these first few slides, I borrowed the information from Pro Literacy. So years and years ago, there was Literacy Volunteers of America, right? And we were under that umbrella. We are now our own independent 501c3. But Pro Literacy became the member organization that we all belong to. So they share the statistics and the information about adult literacy throughout the country. So they say adult literacy is important because it's going to really unlock all the potential that an adult learner has, whether it's their earning potential, their potential to be good parents, good community members, and just have a more fulfilling life. And so some of these stats that Pro Literacy shares, if you're talking about adult literacy as a whole, is 40% of U.S. immigrants are not proficient in English. And so that's going to make up a bulk of our program here in the Central Virginia area. And so those are those who are learning how to read, write, and speak English. Also important to know is that 75% of those who are incarcerated did not finish high school. So that's kind of why adult literacy is really important, is it is going to help those, stay out of trouble, find things to do, get better employment, all of those things. Education is going to be the key to all of that. And then $2.2 trillion of an additional U.S. income through literacy. So essentially, those who have higher literacy are going to have a higher earning income and to contribute more to our economy. So those are really the big picture reasons of why adult literacy is important in just 3 kind of different areas. So adults who are able to read, write, do basic math, use a computer, are more likely to achieve goals such as work, access to healthcare, more involvement in their community. And that's why we're supporting them in the work that we're doing. And so again, big picture, 43 million adults in the United States cannot read, write, or do basic math above a 3rd grade level. So if you just kind of think about that, it's a lot of people at a very low level. And in our community and within our program, those who are native to the United States who are not learning at that level, we call them basic literacy students. And so those students who are low skilled are 2 times more likely to be unemployed, 3 times more likely to be in poverty, 4 times as likely to be in poor health, and then 8 times as likely to be incarcerated, as I kind of mentioned that fact earlier. So these are all of the reasons that we want to support adult learners who want to better their lives through furthering their education. And as I mentioned, a big bulk of our student population are going to be English language learners. And so 1 in 5 individuals in the United States is an immigrant. So that's a pretty big population, right, of our community. And 53% of immigrants are not proficient at speaking English. And if you're familiar with this community, especially if you're working in the medical field, you might see them in your office or in your children's schools, are these immigrants in our community who are not quite proficient enough to have that everyday communication level. So those are the individuals that we are trying to help. And so by 2065, immigrants and their descendants are projected to increase the U.S. population by 103 million people. So this is a growing population, which is why if you look at our statistics over the years, we're also seeing a growing population in our English language learner students. When we were started over 40 years ago, we primarily serve those who are native to Charlottesville or, Albemarle, who might not have graduated high school. But we are seeing a huge increase in our English language learner population, and as is the entire United States. So locally in the Central Virginia area, there is approximately 100,000 immigrants. And 8 in 10 of those were born in Asian or Latin America. And what you're going to see is different pockets of the state are going to have maybe more population. So if you go out to Waynesboro, you're going to see more of the Latin America population. They have a lot of services out there to serve those immigrants, primarily who might be farm workers or things like that. While in Charlottesville, because we have the IRC or the International Rescue Committee, they resettle a large population of refugees coming from Syria or Afghanistan. So depending on where you are in the state, it's going to kind of vary a little bit of the population of the immigrants that you are seeing. And so the Commonwealth Institute of Fiscal Analysis did have this graph. That's where I got these facts, just to kind of show you the breakdown of the regions of birth for those immigrants who are living in our area. And so Charlottesville specifically, in the last 24 years, resettled 4,600 refugees, and this stat came from the IRC. They did a presentation for our volunteers a couple months ago. And the populations we're seeing most here in our area that are being resettled are from Afghanistan, the DR Congo, Syria, and Colombia. And so lots of community agencies are going to work together collaboratively to support different aspects of these learners' lives, right? So our job as literacy volunteers is to support their education. But as anyone knows, individuals are unique and they come with lots of different problems or things that they're trying to accomplish. And so that's where it's really wonderful to have collaborative groups, such as yours, who are like, hey, what are you doing? How can we support you? So here are some different examples of different groups in our community. I mentioned the IRC. They're the resettling agency who help refugees move in and settle into the United States, get homes, get their first jobs, and get their kids established in school, etc. International Neighbors, you might be familiar with. they're going to help more with, I think they have language buddies, so, or helping learn how to drive, going to the grocery store, and navigating everyday life. Similares is an organization that helps specifically those from Latin America, but they have lawyers on staff. So if they're looking at their DACA status or asylum or immigration, any of those parts their lawyers will help with, as well as general day-to-day needs of the Latino community here in Central Virginia. And then another agency that we work with very closely is the Adult Learning Center, TGACE at PVCC, and they're an education component as well. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about the difference between them and us, but we do work pretty closely together to support learners in Charlottesville. And I know from talking to Samantha that you're not all here in Charlottesville. You're probably familiar with the regions of the state. Here we are part of Region 10. So adult education and literacy across the state is separated in these regions in this very colorful state map you have here. So in Region 10, where we are, as I mentioned, TJACE is going to be the overall provider of adult education services that comes through the state. They're part of PVCC. They used to be a part of Charlottesville High School, actually. And they are going to be classroom-based instruction for those who are looking to improve their education. And then literacy volunteers, that's us. We have a completely different model that is a one-to-one approach. And we are not affiliated with the state. We do receive some funding, but we are, as I mentioned, an independent nonprofit. And we are part of what's called a CBLO, which is a community-based literacy organization. And there's several of those throughout the state that we work together. We share resources and trainings to make sure no matter where an individual is within the state of Virginia, they're getting those services that they need to improve their education. So who's literacy volunteers? Now that I've given you this big picture of adult education and why it's important and what we do. So our nonprofit promotes adult literacy through equitable, inclusive, free, confidential, one-to-one English and citizenship tutoring. You know, I see some of those same buzzwords, Samantha, that you're talking about, you know, equitable. That's really important to our organization, is to make sure that every adult has the potential to reach their educational goals. And we're doing everything we can to make that accessible to them. And that does mean free services, but we can only have free services through the power of our volunteers and our donations and community support in that sense. So our programs, first and foremost, is our English for Speakers of Other Languages, or ESOL. This is going to make up the bulk of the students that we're serving. And we use the ESOL terminology because most of our learners speak lots of languages, especially those who might be coming from like Afghanistan or any of those other countries right now who might speak multiple languages. You know, I only speak English, right? But I talked to a student a couple days ago who I think he spoke 5. So that's why we like to use English for speakers of other languages versus English as a second language. I mentioned earlier we have the terminology basic literacy. That is going to be those who are native to our community who might not have graduated high school, are looking for maybe more career credentials to further just get better education, to get a better career, and to do just more within the community. A lot of times those students might have a learning disability that either was or wasn't addressed while they're in the public school system, and they're just looking for that extra support to kind of get through. That is a very small part of our population at this time. Our executive director will say that really when the economy in our area is lower, you're going to see more of those people because they're looking for more jobs. So they're like, oh, I really need to beef up my reading skills or my math skills so I can get a better job. But when there's lots of jobs available, we're not going to see a high population of the basic literacy students. And then a huge part of our program right now is citizenship, which Catherine's going to tell you all about. But the background to know is that we had a grant from the government, the U.S. government, a couple years ago to help support students who were going through the process to solidify their place in the United States and become citizens. The grant ran out, but the need did not. If anything, it just grew. So we kept the program going. We hired staff. Catherine is phenomenal at what she does. And it's a really integral part of our mission now, is to help these immigrants say, yes, I'm an American, I'm a citizen, and do everything they need to do to feel secure. And, you know, you'll hear all the time, like, I get to vote, they have that pride in our community, and it's really nice that we can help them with that. And then in partnerships, we work with TJACE at PVCC, as I mentioned, specifically in 2 areas. Students who are working towards high school equivalency, so GED, NEDP. So students will go to the TJACE and say, hey, I need to get my GED. And then TJACE will come to us and say, do you have a volunteer tutor who can help them through this program? And the same thing goes for career training. So it might be CNA, CDL, ServSafe, any student who's looking to get those career credentials, we can help them with. PVCC will have kind of the classroom, and then we'll give them a tutor and extra materials to help them study and prepare. So who are our students? Last year, we had just over 300 students, and see this breakdown, as I mentioned, 4% are basic literacy, and then 96% are that ESOL. And so our student population is really diverse. They're coming from 40 different countries speaking 41 different languages. And again, if you're working in the medical field and you're in your offices, you're probably seeing that diversity, right, of the different populations of individuals coming in for services. So one thing I do think is interesting is the top 5 countries that we're seeing students from in our office. Afghanistan, Mexico, Iraq, Syria, and Honduras are the top 5. As I mentioned, I've been with the organization since 2016, and Afghanistan has been slowly sneaking up that list. And we can all kind of think about more recent events of why they're now right up there at the top. And the languages we're seeing from our students, the top 5 are Spanish, Dari, Arabic, Pashto, and then of course, English. And so for our students, when they come to us, the first thing we do is give them a test to determine what their level is. Whether it's their reading and writing level or their speaking level, they'll meet with staff. And then we ask them, why are you here? What are you wanting to do? What are your goals? And it could be something as simple as, I want to be able to communicate with my doctor or my children's teacher. Or it could be like Ali, the young man there in the front who came from Turkey, and he said, I want to be a doctor, right? So there's going to be very different kind of pathways for those students. One who just wants to be able to communicate better as a parent, and another who wants to be able to go on to higher education. And that's the beauty of what we do through individualized instruction, is you can really tailor the materials and the work that the student is doing to help them succeed, that they wouldn't be able to do in a classroom environment. But when you're working one-on-one with a tutor, you can really focus in on, where is it that you need to speak English? What are you hoping to achieve? And then all of our students do attend computer-based or group classes while they're waiting for a tutor. That helps us continue to evaluate their level and to make sure that they have the time to commit to our program. Because we are fully run by volunteers, we don't want to match a student with a volunteer tutor only to have them realize, oh, actually, I don't have time for this. So we don't want them to waste the volunteer's time. So if they're looking to see how much commitment time they have, they can figure that out in the first few weeks doing computer-based learning or those group classes that we have. So one-to-one tutoring, that's what we do. That is our, our model and our mission is we match every student who comes into our program with their own volunteer tutor. And so last year we had just over 200 volunteer tutors. These cute pictures are from our tutoring rooms at the Jefferson School. We are located downtown across from the Omni off of 4th Street. And we have these great tutoring rooms. We have 6 rooms in our office, and tutors and students can meet in there and work together. There's maps and computers and everything that they need. And the commitment that we ask our tutors and students to be able to meet is approximately 2 hours a week or 8 hours a month. That's what we think it's going to take and help that student reach their educational goals. And what we do ask is that both the student and the tutor be able to commit to a year. So if a student is only here for a semester because they're traveling with their spouse who might be teaching at UVA, it will be like, there might be other programs for you. We're looking for those who are staying in the community and who are committed here to help them improve their lives and to be able to get better jobs to help their kids in school. And so both the tutor and the volunteer, again, we ask that they can make that year commitment to our program. And then again, it's approximately 8 hours of instruction a month. And our other rule is that all of our tutoring has to take place in a public location. So we don't go into homes. All of the tutoring should either be in our office or the library or coffee shops. or virtual. You know, that was the beauty of the pandemic, is we had to pivot to doing things on Zoom, such as we're meeting with you. And a lot of our tutors and students kind of liked that model because they didn't have to worry about transportation or childcare. So last year, I think just under half of our matches were meeting online sometimes. So it could be like, oh, let's meet in the office this week, but next week, let's, you know, meet online kind of thing. That's sort of how the program works in that sense. So how can you help now that I've like given you all of this, you know, bucket of information about adult literacy and working with English language learners? First and foremost is referring someone who needs help. So it could be that you realize someone's having a hard time filling out a form because they can't read it, or they need an interpreter. What we see a lot, especially with our students, is their kids are serving as their interpreter. So they're going to their appointments and helping them do that interpretation. Our services are free, so we want to make sure that everyone knows that they're available. So if you come across someone who doesn't know how to read or is struggling, please make sure you refer them to us or one of the agencies across the state that is similar, that can help get them that educational attainment that they need to be successful. The second thing is, obviously, we always need volunteers, right? We're literacy volunteers. That's what we do. We run off the power of volunteers. So if you like what you've heard today and what we're doing, please reach out to me. I'm happy to tell you more about what it takes to be a literacy volunteer and a tutor within our organization. Make a financial contribution. It takes approximately $1,000 per year per student to run our program. Again, our services are free for the students, so we rely on donations and grant support to make sure that our services continue to be free for the students. The only time that we'll see that we do ask students is if they can make a donation towards the cost of a textbook after they've been in the program for a while, because that helps them really take ownership in their education, but all services are free. So we love financial contributions to help offset those costs. And lastly, you can participate in wordplay. And if you don't know about wordplay, Samantha can invite me back just to talk about wordplay, which is our annual trivia competition that happens at the Paramount. It is so much fun. You guys should have a team. It's teams of 3 compete to see who the smartest in town are. So next year's game is on April 25th. And it is so much fun. It's the only fundraiser we do every year. So it's a good opportunity to raise money and to have a lot of fun with your colleagues at the same time. And some people get really competitive. So happy to share more information about that too. So if you are interested in joining us as a literacy volunteer, we do have 2 trainings coming up in September this month. We are in person at Northside Library at the end of the month on the 23rd. And then in October, we're going to do virtual training, which is 3 Tuesdays in a row, and that's on Zoom. Of course, no one wants to sit in a training on Zoom for 6 hours, which is why we split it up over those weeks. So we have 2 different options depending on people's preferences. And the handout that I gave Samantha will have a link with more information on those trainings. So that is the end of my part of the presentation. I'm so proud of myself. I was keeping a timer and I kept it at 20 minutes, Catherine. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen to see, after my rapid fire of lots of information, if there's any of the broad strokes of literacy and adult education questions before Catherine jumps into citizenship and the importance of that program. I talk real fast,
we're waiting,
guys.
feel free to put anything in the chat. But while we're waiting, actually, when we set up this and you all were coming, I was like, I bet there's at least 3 people in this UPG team who are passionate about trivia that could make a solid wordplay team. So that was already on my things to start with. So I'm glad to have a date that it's April, so we have some time. So if you're listening in, you or a coworker or somebody you know is passionate about trivia, it is a really fun time. And that would be a really fun thing to do. So anyways, I'm glad you brought up wordplay because that is really fun. I am going to ask a question that may be on some people's minds. We're talking about Charlottesville, Albemarle, but let's say we have some of our team on here that's in Culpeper or in the Augusta area. Are there literacy volunteers in those areas? What's the best way for them to get involved if they say, oh, I really want to do this, but I'm not in Charlottesville?
Yeah, absolutely. So the handout that Samantha will send you that I put together, I think one of the first links is going to take you to VALRIC, which is the Virginia Adult Literacy Resource Center. Oh, there it is, VALRIC. And there is a whole list of all of the programs across the state. So you can like look by your region or by your community. But I can tell you, yes, there is a literacy of Culpeper. And out Augusta, I think is Learn, or maybe it's Reach, Learn, which is Learn.
It's an acronym for something, but it's the word learn.
Yeah, Learn English and Reading Now, I think is what it is. Blue Ridge Literacy is going to be out more towards Roanoke. So we're a part of, again, a community-based literacy organization, CBLOs. So we all get together, right? Because there's no competition over students. We all want to make sure people are getting the services they need. And so we have no problem referring volunteers or referring students of, hey, this might be a better fit for you, or you don't have to drive all the way to Charlottesville. You've got a program right here in Waynesboro, right? So you can help with. Now, I will say, as far as our very close region, if you're looking at Waynesboro, Culpeper, a lot of those program directors will come to Charlottesville and do our training because we are just a bigger established. And so we do kind of a train the trainer for them. So a lot of the materials and the things that they're using may have originated here in Charlottesville, or they might say, hey, I need extra support. I think we're one of the only ones with the adult education library. So we have a library of resources that others can come use as well. So even if you're not right here in Charlottesville, we are very well connected to all the others. So check on that link and kind of look around. And you can be like, hey, literacy volunteers sent us, because we do that pretty often as we send volunteers to the other centers as well.
Yeah, we just had somebody completed our training, our most recent training last weekend, the weekend before.
Yeah, last weekend.
And then realized that he lived a little further west and came in to meet with our program manager. And then they sort of talked about that. And he's like, why don't you go over to Learn? And so he just sent him right over because it'll be closer and easier for him to get connected and volunteer over there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, why don't I go ahead, if it's okay?
Can I ask one more? Just because these are also questions that I get a lot, like just when talking to people myself. Is just to re-emphasize, literacy volunteers is not just focused on people learning English or English as another language, especially if anyone on this call or watching this in the future is thinking about someone to refer that could benefit from the services. This is also for English language speakers who just need that extra assistance as well, correct?
Yeah, Catherine, I'll let you take that one as far as, because you do so much of our training.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So, so as Heather said, we have a much smaller, currently only 4% of our students fall in that category. But historically, it was a lot more than that. And we're always more than happy to have more students who are English speakers, but who need that literacy help, the reading and writing support because they fell through the cracks educationally, or whatever the case may have been. But yes, absolutely, that is a student population that we are very happy to serve.
And I will say, like, our curriculum that we use that comes from Cambridge, it is very focused on adult learners as well, right? So it is like, what are the skills that you're going to need as an adult learner? So it could be something like there's a healthcare unit, right? So of writing a note to your kid's teacher, like of how, like, what are the skills, what are the vocabulary, what is the grammar that you will need for these sort of pieces. Other units are on other applicable parts to an adult learner. So whether it's the reading and writing component or the speaking and listening, what are there 5, Catherine? Reading, writing, speaking, listening. Is that it? Just 4? There's 4. Okay. The aspects of language that we cover.
And Heather's example, I like too. We use this one in our training and talking about as you move up through the textbook levels, English levels. So at a lower level, you're working on being able to read the front of a medication box, and then you move up to being able to read the back of the medication box, being able to read instructions from a doctor, about, you know, when and how to take medications, looking at prescription medications. They work on should and have to in connection with specifically in the healthcare unit. Which things should you do? Which things do you have to do? So that's, you know, sort of, we do use health as a really integral part of people's learning. All right, so let me jump now to citizenship. And so I'm going to sort of cover two things. One is just helping you kind of understand the citizenship process. And then the second is understanding the exemptions, exceptions, and accommodations. And I specifically want to make sure I get into this because one of the things that some people need is a medical exemption for portions of the citizenship test. So I want to make sure, particularly in this population that we're talking with today, that it would be really helpful for you all to be more aware of what that medical exemption piece looks like. So that's where we're going. The primary eligibility requirement, folks have to be over 18 and have been a legal permanent resident for at least 5 years. There's a few other pieces. You have to live in your current state for at least 3 months. You have to have been physically present for the majority of the 5 years during which you've been a legal permanent resident. But in order to apply for citizenship, these are the big two things. You're an adult and you've had your green card for at least 5 years. When people want to become a citizen, they submit the naturalization application. It's called the N-400 form. USCIS loves their letter and number combinations. It costs $725 to apply, so it's a big commitment. There are fee waivers and fee reductions depending on folks' income level, but navigating that paperwork, I will confess, is also very challenging. The citizenship application, it's 20 pages long. A big portion of it, about half of that, is questions about themselves. So things about their birthday and their address, and they have to have information from over the past 5 years, things about their marriage, any previous marriages, family. There's questions about their parents and about their children, work experience, school experience, travel. And then there's a whole series of yes and no questions where folks are asked, have you ever registered to vote? Do you owe any overdue taxes? Have you ever not filed a federal tax return since you've had your permanent residency? Do you now have, or have you ever had, a hereditary title or order of nobility? We have yet to have any of our students have to renounce their titles, but if Prince Harry ever goes through this, he will have to get into that. So all sorts of questions: service in the military, any arrests. There's sort of other kind of morals questions. And then there's also questions about your understanding of what the oath of allegiance will be in order to become a citizen. And then sort of agreeing to all of the things that you have to agree to. If the law requires it, would you bear arms on behalf of the United States? Would you perform non-combatant services? Would you perform work of national importance under civilian direction? So you have to agree that you would do all of those things as part of the application form. After people apply, they have to go in for fingerprinting. It's usually currently, in the current administration, it's taking about 4 to 6 months from when people apply until they get their citizenship interview. And that's what people generally think of as the citizenship test. It's a one-on-one interview. It's not like the SAT where there's a certain day where everybody goes in to take their test. They're all individually scheduled. So you submit your application and then you just wait to hear for your citizenship interview date. The interview itself is 4 separate tests. Your ability to speak and understand English, your ability to read in English, to write in English, and your ability to answer some portion of the 100 questions about history and government that everyone has to learn. So the speaking and understanding part, it includes, there'll be some small talk. Oh, how was your drive here today? Did anyone come with you? Why do you want to be a citizen? That's all checking your ability to speak and understand English. your ability to follow commands like follow me, raise your right hand, please be seated, you know, all of those things. They're assessing your ability to speak and understand English. They are also going to orally ask you many of the questions from your application and potentially ask follow-up questions about any of those. So this piece really gets into some pretty challenging English level for speaking and understanding. Next is the reading test. The reading test is actually just one sentence. You only have to read one sentence correctly. You can get up to 3 chances. You don't have to be exact. You can have small errors, but those are going to sort of fall into the judgment call of the officer. And so there'll be a tablet and the officer will say, please read this sentence. And then they'll, you know, a sentence will appear on the tablet. So for example, who was George Washington is one of the possible sentences that someone could get. The reading test, those are always in the form of a question. The USCIS, the Citizenship and Immigration Services that administers this, they provide a master list of all of the words that are used to make up the reading test. And so you put those together into, it's about 50 or so possible sentences that you might get asked. Some examples, you know, what is the capital of the US? Who elects the president? Name the city where the president lives, and so forth. The writing test, similarly, you have to be able to correctly write one sentence. You get up to 3 sentences in order to achieve that. Again, you're allowed to make small mistakes. So for example, the officer might say, write this sentence, Washington was the first president. You're writing on a tablet, either with a stylus or with your finger. So you would write the sentence, and then the officer decides if you've accurately, or at least come close enough in writing the sentence. If not, you get a second chance, third chance. If so, then you've passed the writing test. Again, there's a list of words, and you combine those words into, again, about 50 possible sentences that people might get as their writing test sentences. These are, you know, a lot of these are harder to spell. English spelling is a mess. I feel like I spend a lot of my time just reiterating, I'm so sorry. English spelling is a mess. A lot of these words are really hard to figure out. How come we make sometimes the sound with CI, sometimes make it with an S, sometimes make it with a CE. English is a mess. All right, and then lastly, as I said, the civics questions, this is where people have to demonstrate their understanding of 100 questions about history, government. There's a little bit of geography in there. They'll be asked up to 10 questions, and they have to get 6 of them correct. You can see some examples there of some of the types of questions. USCIS does provide, you know, possible correct answers. And so this part, you know, a lot of people just treat this as memorization. In our program, we try to give people the context behind the answers to help them more effectively memorize. But ultimately, it's not like, can you explain the Electoral College system? It's much more concrete questions and answers that they have to be able to answer. The questions currently are asked orally. There is talk of a possible revision to the test. They're looking at doing some trial testing of switching this one to a multiple choice, which would make the reading level much more difficult. So there's been a lot of back and forth, and we seem to be on hold. We were supposed to have USCIS was going to do a conference for people who volunteered to help participate in the trial testing of a revised test on August 2nd. And like the day before, they canceled it and said there was a scheduling problem and that they'd get back to us soon. And they have not gotten back to us in the last month. So we think there's probably some behind the scenes happening with if it's going to go forward, and if so, what it might look like. But this is, you know, currently the questions will be asked orally. So for example, who was president during World War I might be one of the questions somebody would get. So that gives you kind of a sense of what the citizenship process looks like. Any questions about that piece? And then I can dive into the medical waivers. I know, Samantha, you were interested in sort of how this ties in with heritage. So I think that about that a lot in terms of what the government has chosen to include in their 100 civics questions, because that's where the heritage piece most strongly comes forward, in terms of what is the American heritage that we want new citizens to be aware of and to understand. So, and it's super interesting with them currently talking about a test revision as, what questions would they add now, as compared to the current test was developed and approved in 2008. There's only one, Susan B. Anthony is the only woman that appears. Martin Luther King Jr. is the only person of color who appears on the current test. So it's interesting to think about that they did assemble a group of experts from a bunch of areas of U.S. history and U.S. government, and with a lot of different interest in bringing in other sort of cultural context for the test revision. But as I said, the piece of switching it to a multiple choice seems to be maybe the reason why that's getting held up. We'll see where that goes. As a former government teacher, it drives me crazy. There's no questions about primaries and caucuses. There's no questions about juries. There's no questions about the Electoral College. So like things that are important to understanding how our government works, there's not that much of that. So
that was, and I may have just missed it, but when is the last time this was updated?
2008. Yeah.
2008. Okay. I was trying to remember. Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Apparently, 50 years ago, it was up to individual judges to decide what they wanted to ask the citizenship applicants who came into them. And so there was, over the years, there have been various rounds of trying to make it more standardized. It's moved into, USCIS administers that component. The judges are only involved in administering the oaths. So there was a lot of effort to make it much more standardized. And so there would be less sort of judgment call as to whether you think somebody's answer was correct. But in doing so, this is always the issue with standardized testing, is that, the things that are easy to test aren't always the things that are most important to know. So yeah, it's an interesting little collection of facts that they think folks need to know. Like, name one of the writers of the Federalist Papers is on the list, which, I don't know that's as important to functioning every day in our democracy, personally. Because also then, in order to learn that question, you got to explain the Federalist Papers, which, that's its own beast. So yeah.
I don't know about everyone else on this call, but I am so interested in these questions and how many I will throw myself out there personal, not putting anyone else. But I'm like, how many of these would I even be able to answer?
Well, we can, if we can amend that handout that we're going to send before you send it out, I can add a link to the 100 questions.
I don't know if anyone else is as nerdy feeling as I am about this, but I would be so interested and would be very open about what I'm sure would be my atrocious score in this. So yes. Oh yes, we already have yes please coming through.
Oh, all right. Awesome.
Yes. So we will amend that. I am very curious to see. How very interesting. For those on here, if you haven't, the DE&I newsletter just went out yesterday, and our theme for September is heritage, just in case if you haven't gotten to open that up. So that is why we were talking about heritage and the importance here. So yes, please amend that and send that along. We would like that.
I will. All right. So let me run through the information about the medical exemptions that I think will be really helpful for you all to be aware of. And then if we have time at the end, we can even take a little citizenship. I've got flashcards here. We can run through some questions. All right. So first of all, there is a sort of age and number of years formula by which some people can get exemptions from the English portion of the citizenship test. So it's like if you're 50 or older and have been a permanent resident for 20 or more years, you don't have to be able to do the speaking and understanding, reading and writing in English. And then you would be able to use a translator for civics questions. Then there's like, if you're 55 and it's 15 or more years as a legal permanent resident, there's if you're over, I forget if it's 60 or 65, you only have to learn 20 of the 100 questions. So you don't have to learn all 100 of those. So they do have some exemptions that are based on the formula of your age and the number of years you've been a legal permanent resident. But the other piece is that you can get a medical certification for a disability exception from any of those 4 tests. So that is another form. It's called as I said, they love their forms. This is an N648 is the official form that has to be submitted for a medical exception. The form is 5 pages long. The instructions is 5 pages long. So they have pretty detailed instructions for completing the form. It used to be a much longer form. They did condense it down to 5 pages, and really the 4th page is just a few signatures. So the form has gotten much more manageable. It has to be completed within 6 months before you submit your application. So, if I'm submitting my application in August, I can't have gotten the form filled out by my doctor prior to February, the previous February. So it can't be a sort of older document from your doctor. So it has to be timely when you submit it. It has to be certified by a medical doctor, a doctor of osteopathy, or a clinical psychologist. The assessment could be done by others, but then one of those 3 has to be the one that officially signs off on the form to certify the medical exception. The things that need to be included, kind of key things, the clinical diagnosis and the medical code for it. It could be a physical disability, a developmental disability, a mental impairment. So it could be like DSM that people are drawing in for their diagnosis and codes. They point out that it is going to be important to clearly describe how each disability or impairment prevents them from doing one portion of the test. So if people just list this is their disability or this is their impairment, the applicant will not get the medical exception. The doctor has to articulate how the disability or impairment impacts the applicant's ability to do specific pieces of the test. If that connection is not made by the doctor on the form, the applicant will have to still do those pieces of the test. So that's and USCIS has shared, I've attended countless webinars with them, that's the biggest piece where they'll say, this is their impairment, they can't do these tests. But if they don't explain why that impairment means they can't do these tests, the officer will not accept it. They give an example within their instruction sheet of like making that connection. So you'll be able to see I just pulled directly USCIS's example that they provided. So you'll see that when you get the slides. You will have to specifically indicate, is it all parts of the test? Is it just the reading and writing? Is it just the civics? Like what pieces of the test are the ones that the disability or impairment impacts? We have students, for example, I met with a student this morning who has a medical waiver for the reading and writing based on significant vision issues. We have some students who, because of trauma, sometimes physical, sometimes like PTSD, maybe they're getting an exemption for all parts of the test. So all of that is going to depend on what the disability or impairment is as to which parts of the test would be impacted. And so on the form, you indicate, is it all 4 or which of the 4 tests are implicated by the exception. They do specifically ask that people answer all of the questions using common terminology that a person without medical training can understand, and without abbreviations. so that the USCIS officer feels like, okay, yes, I can approve this. I understand what, basically they need to be able to understand that why connection is being made so that they can declare that it is sufficient. When a doctor or a other medical professional who's doing the interaction with the applicant in order to determine whether there is a disability or impairment, there can be an interpreter involved. So folks can use interpreters as they're assessing the disabilities and impairments, and they just need to be included on the exception form. And then at the end of the day, the USCIS officer is going to mark, was this medical exception form completed? Is it sufficient, insufficient, or do they need a request for additional evidence? So our goal is that all of these forms are filled out in a manner that the USCIS officer will grant it. The applicant doesn't know until they get to their interview whether their medical exception is being granted. So the quality of that medical exception form is enormously important so that the applicant can go and feel confident that their medical waiver would be accepted. The USCIS is very clear that their officers are not making medical judgments. They're not saying, well, I don't think that would warrant, this exception. They're just supposed to determine whether the medical waiver form, the medical exception form, adequately provides the required elements and explains that connection between the impairment and the reason why it impacts each test. And if the doctor does that sufficiently, then it will be approved. What I've been talking about so far is exemptions. There are also test accommodations that an applicant can get without any sort of medical certification. So for example, somebody who needs large print, they don't need any kind of doctor's form completed in order to go into their interview and say, I need large print. Examples of the most common accommodations that USCIS says that they are asked for is large print for people with low vision, Braille copies of the reading test, wheelchair loans for just to physically get through their building, breaks, and those can include like just deep breath breaks for anxiety, asking the officer to leave the door open. Again, that might be sort of an anxiety related. It might be a cultural issue. For example, like a woman who cannot be in a closed door with a male officer. The most common are a request to be accompanied by another individual, either because of unstable walking or because of anxiety. And USCIS, their sort of general policy is that they grant accommodations. Like if you say you need that accommodation, they will provide it for you. All right, that's what I've got for you. Questions? Oh, it's exactly 1 o'clock. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. This has been so, I didn't even look at the clock. This has been really interesting. And I was just like taking it. I was like, oh, it is 1. If anyone has any questions, feel free to go ahead and ask. However, if you're going through your day and you think of something and you're like, oh, shoot, I do want to know more about that. Everyone on this call right now, you know how to get in touch with me. Please send me an email. Do not think twice. I will connect you with Heather and Catherine, and you can be able to ask or get connected with however you want. I appreciate it. Heather, did you want to add something?
No, I was just going to say, we definitely, just because of, UVA physicians group is why we want to make sure we mention that medical waiver part, because it just might be something that you come across in your offices. So we wanted you to just have all that information. So we understand it was a little tedious there at the end, but I think it's really important information, especially for those working in the medical field, to understand how that component works.
I think that was fantastic. I know a lot of these lunch and learns have been really helpful, especially in the clinic setting. We've been able to learn a lot more about things as they're coming in. So I'm sure that was really good information. And like I said at the beginning, this is recorded. So if you have somebody on your team, or if anybody wasn't able to join in or had to leave a little early, or if you came in a little late, it's okay. This is going to be up on the website very soon. So I am going to just say one more thank you. Oh, yes, Catherine.
I just wanted to say, I looked up on the statistics that USCIS provides. Apparently 3.5% of applications in the most recent fiscal year that they had data for that they had medical exemptions submitted along with the naturalization application. So 3.5%, which was higher than I had expected.
Yeah. So this is something we could definitely see coming through. So that's really good information to now, like, if you weren't already aware, to know, this is why this is how it has to be done. So yeah, especially for any of you who are working in the clinics, if you want to know more about that, or if you have any questions on how to proceed, just in case, please, like I said, you know how to get in touch with me, and I am happy to connect you. Quick thank you to all of you who joined today and who spent your lunch break learning more about literacy volunteers and how to get involved anywhere in Virginia, not just in Charlottesville, key point. And also Heather and Catherine, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad we finally made this happen. Thank you for doing this and telling us all about this. And I can't wait to look at all of that follow-up material personally and see what I do and don't know. So I'll be sending that out. I'll be sending that out to everyone, and feel free to share all of that information as it comes your way. And everyone, have a great rest of your day and rest of your week.
Thank you, Samantha.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.